It's Pentecost as well as being the Queen's Jubilee, and it's also the first time we're trying to do this slightly different way of church. Don't worry if it gets a bit messy. Toby can turn me up if anybody's making any noise. So it's an incredible story that the Bible tells us. I wonder if you think it is just a story, or like me, perhaps you think that it really happened that day, that there was fire on people's heads and wind coming through the room. It's astonishing to think that. Before then, God's presence had been kind of just in the temple. People came to visit God in the temple. After that, it had been where Jesus was. He was walking around. He was like a portable temple, kind of. But then all of a sudden at Pentecost, and still, the Holy Spirit, God, is in and on and works through all of us. And it is incredible. It's hard to believe. It's bonkers. And we've heard this story. The disciples had seen Jesus' resurrection. They'd seen him ascend. And then he said, wait here. So they did. They waited and they prayed. And the Holy Spirit appeared. Can you imagine how it would have felt to be in a small room after all that waiting and see your friends on fire and hear that rushing wind? I mean, how would you feel? You'd be pretty scared, I would think. That's what you would think. I think it would be pretty scary. If that suddenly happened now, I think that would really freak me out. I'm not sure how calm I would be. But the other thing, of course, that we're told about the Holy Spirit is that Jesus told us in that bit of the gospel that the Holy Spirit brings peace. That somehow when this is happening, there was peace. Hopefully they weren't too scared. But whatever happened, they had something to say all of a sudden. And they went out of that room and they started talking to people. Talking is good. They went out and they started telling everybody what was going on. And this is the bit that struck me this year. If I want to make one point about Pentecost, it's this. Everybody heard the language of the gospel in their home language, in the language that they heard their parents talking to them. And they had come together to this place having to speak Latin and Greek because that's what the empire said. We're going to be in charge of everybody. You need to talk our language while you are here. Have you ever been abroad or worked abroad and you catch a moment where you've been working really hard, you've learned a bit of French or German, whatever it is you need to get by, and you catch a bit of English. And it's lovely, isn't it? You suddenly feel at home. You know, you're on the beach, somebody turns the radio on and you go, bit of Radio 4 in the corner for me, or the Archers comes on, and I just feel at home. And even more so, if you're not just there on holiday, but you're stuck with this language of the empire, and it's suddenly the language that your mother and father spoke to you, the language of your heart. That's what was, it's not the only thing, but that was the thing that struck me this Pentecost, that when God had news for all these people who had gathered from around the world, he wanted to tell them how much he loved them, and he did that in the language that they all knew deep down. So sometimes a sermon is a thing where you get a little lecture, a little lesson, and you learn something about God. We're going to try something different in these services and try and just meet with God in this time. And there's lots of ways that we do meet with God as different people. Right? The spaces that we want to create to let the Holy Spirit in today, some of us meet God, I think, in quiet and alone in prayer. Might be a little hard to do. But if that's what you need, for it to be fairly quiet, it does get fairly quiet up at that end of the church, and that's fine. So there are candles up there. And if you meet God alone in quiet and maybe reading or thinking, and you meet God sort of intellectually, some of us do, then the rest of my sermon is here. So you can have a read and a sit and a chill and do that, and you won't have to join in with the rest of what we're doing, which is fine. If you meet God in action, or for me in distraction, I know I meet God when I'm busy with my fingers. If you've got any people who knit or do Lego in the room, sometimes doing stuff physically is helpful and meditative. The colouring in that we've got, I had to print more of these. I brought these along for the 9:30 lot this morning, and there were no children in the room this morning. None. But I had to print all of these again because they were done. The colouring in was a smash hit with people in their 70s, 80s and 90s. So do not be afraid to just colour in. And then while you are doing that, sometimes it frees the rest of our conscious mind up to talk about God or to meet with God. So maybe you meet God in that. Some of us meet God talking. Fraser meets God talking, I'm quite sure. If you do, I have a couple of questions for you. And just chat to each other if you would like to, that's fine. I would like to know how you feel about these gifts of the Holy Spirit. Have you seen flames on people's heads? Have you seen miraculous healings? Have you heard speaking in tongues or done speaking in tongues? What's your experience of that in yourself or in other people? That might be a good thing to chat about. It's one of those things, though, that not all Christians experience. I don't know why. We also, though, are all promised the fruit of the Holy Spirit. And we do that song. Toby and I were typing this in earlier, and we could do what the fruit of the Holy Spirit was because we did the song. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, goodness, faithfulness, self-control. That is the stuff that changes in us day by day, year by year. So if you're having a conversation on your table about the work of the Holy Spirit, what have you seen in yourself, in other people, of the fruit of the Holy Spirit? And the other thing that you might want to do is there's some cutting and sticking to do, because cutting and sticking is fun. To be a leader with integrity, I had a go. There's some little flames that you can just colour in if you want to, that have already got a prayer on the back. Sometimes, if you're not an out loud person, you might know what you pray when you write it down. I had a go at that this week. I made this, I wrote my little prayer, and I was inspired to write another little prayer. And it lives on my desk. It sits at the top of my keyboard. So maybe you meet God doing this. We've got some templates. You can take these away. You can draw around them. You can cut them out. We've got a few more pairs of scissors. So there is stuff to do, but we're going to give you about 10 minutes now. Toby's going to play some music. And I want to know how do you meet God? And maybe this is a space that you can. Either on your tables talking or doing or colouring or sat quietly at the top. Over to you.